Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I'm Joe Devine and I'm joined now by Alex Stewart.
It's an afternoon, isn't it? Good afternoon, Joe.
Seb Stafford-Bloor.
Hi, Joe.
And James Horncastle.
Hello.
Hello, James Horncastle. How are you?
Wonderful, Joe. That was I don't know whether it was University Challenge from you, but it was, I appreciated the intro.
Well, the great Paxman, I'm happy. I'm happy for the comparison. Would I be correct in thinking, probably not, but that you are sat on some wonderful Italian villa, eating a pink ice cream, drinking some kind of fizzy lemon drink on the back of a Vespa? Is that right?
So sat on a villa on the back of a Vespa. That
it's all
sounds
very dangerous.
It does. But no, I am. I'm currently locked down. I do have a nice espresso next to me, but that's about it. There's very little in the way of Dolce Vita glamour going on behind my laptop screen as we speak.
Okay. Don't meet your heroes, gang. Anyway, we're here today to do another Sensible Transfers episode. Sorry about that. That was very rude. And we're talking all about Serie A. If you hadn't already realised, James is of course a Serie A expert, and he's here to make sure that we don't wander into choppy seas. Before we get there, let me remind you that you can get 40% off an annual subscription to The Athletic by visiting theathletic.com/Tifo Transfers. I believe that works out to be about £3 a month or some small amount of money like that. There you can read all of James Horncastle's fine work on Serie A. Alex has even been writing some things recently, a nice analysis of Højbjerg, for example, and of course all of the other wonderful things and people that you'll find behind the fated paywall. Do give it a try. That's theathletic.com/Tifo Transfers. Anyway, without further ado, I shall leave you in the cool embrace and the warm hands of James Horncastle. Okay, we are starting with Inter Milan. We're going to try and cover as many clubs as possible, but we'll probably run out of time, so apologies for anyone that missed off the end. Inter, first a question comes from Joe Beckwith on YouTube. Joe Beckwith asks, what's next for Conte's Inter? What areas should they be targeting to challenge properly for the league next year? Because according to Joe Beckwith, Juventus seem to be there for the taking at the moment. James, what would you say to Joe Beckwith?
Well, they probably need to resolve Antonio Conte's future first, which will only happen after their Europa League campaign comes to a conclusion. He's due to have talks with the 20-something president of Inter, Steven Zhang, once that is finished, because despite having what I would say has been a pretty good first season, Conte has given the impression of being pretty dissatisfied with signings, with leaks to the media, all these kind of things that I think he felt that he could shape the team in this image, and he hasn't really been able to do that, despite Inter breaking the transfer record for him twice, despite them paying 20 million for Christian Eriksen in January when he would have been available for free from February the 1st onwards. So they need to do that. And then I suppose, in fairness to Conte, there are certain targets or certain positions that they did not fulfill either last summer or in January. For example, he really wanted a backup striker, because you can never have too many strikers if you're Antonio Conte. He wanted Edin Dzeko last summer. I was at Daniele De Rossi's last game for Roma, and Dzeko was substituted in that game, and it felt that he was so close to Inter that he was booed off. And then that didn't happen for a variety of reasons. And then they agreed personal terms with Olivier Giroud in January, only for Giroud's move to be kind of scuppered by them being unable to get a deal done for Eriksen at a cheaper price. So they probably also need another right-sided centre-back, given that Milan Skriniar has struggled a little bit to adapt from the change, with the change from a back four to a back three. Godin as well, whilst he's sort of done okay in this kind of Europa League bubble, hasn't really convinced over the course of the entire season. So I think that's something that they need to address. And then maybe the left wing-back position as well. because it hasn't really been entirely satisfactory, I think, in terms of that position having much of a future, because Ashley Young has actually done much better than many of the other UK or British imports to Serie A in recent times. He's been pretty damn good actually since January, but he's in his mid-30s, so I think they'll look at that and see if there's something to be done there.
Do you know, I have to say on Ashley Young, I did feel for him a little bit in his last couple of years at Manchester United, because I always thought his performances deserved more than the sort of constant criticism that he got from supporters. But anyway, you started by talking about a striker. That's great, because Bosson asks for a replacement for Lautaro Martinez on the assumption that he's leaving. I mean, firstly, James, do we think that's happening?
I think it's very difficult for Barcelona to do that deal because his buyout clause, which I think was around 112 million euro, expired at sort of the beginning of June or July. Can't remember now. Everything's a blur. And in a normal market, I suppose, considering how well Lautaro had played in the first 6 or 7 months of the season, that fee seemed on the cheap side. So now the ball is very much in Inter's court. You know, they can demand whatever they want for him. And I think there's a feeling that, you know, Barcelona just don't have the liquidity and they don't have the kind of bargaining chips to send Inter's way in order to kind of persuade them to sell Lautaro. And you can only imagine what Conte's reaction would be to the club letting a player of his talent go when Conte feels like he needs him to sustain this title challenge that he's on. Yeah,
that's really interesting. Can I ask that, related to his buyout clause? I know we can't remember exactly when it was, but do you remember if in an ordinary season without the break and without the restart and without the delayed transfer window opening, would there have been a period at the beginning of an ordinary transfer window for that buyout clause to be used, or was it always going to expire before whenever the transfer window opened? Do you know? Because that seems like an odd situation, doesn't it?
I don't have the exact details to hand, but there was a very kind of small window of opportunity for a interested party to exploit that buyout clause. I think it was something like a 2-week period, and then once it expired, obviously now Inter can do what they want. I need to check whether it's the same story next season, whether that time frame, that window of opportunity is open again. But I mean, Inter have got some insurance, I would say, because this kind of answers the question under the assumption that he leaves, is that Alexis Sanchez has really kind of done pretty well when he's been fit and available. That was the case when he joined, and he joined more or less the final days of the summer transfer window. He then went off on international duty. He came back. He played pretty well against Sampdoria, even though he got sent off like early in the first half, in the second half. But there was enough there that you thought, wow, actually, okay, Sanchez. There's still flickers of the Sanchez that got us all excited when he was at Udinese, Barcelona, and Arsenal. And then he suffered a pretty bad injury, an ankle injury, which required surgery in the next international break when it was at October time. And Conte lost him for all that time. And then you have the lockdown happens. But from what he's done over since the restart, he's been mightily impressive and has had a good relationship on the pitch, either playing with Lautaro or Lukaku. I think it was 10 goal involvements, 7 assists, 3 goals, which I think, convinced Inter to do the deal on a permanent basis. And if the worst comes to the worst and Lautaro does agitate for a move and Barcelona do find a way of financing that deal, then I think Alexis is a kind of in-house solution there.
Alex, then, let's come to you. In the case of that Lautaro does leave, do you think there's a replacement out there for him beyond Alexis Sanchez as an in-house option?
I think someone that we mentioned in the context of the Man City discussion might be worth looking at, Chimia Villa. I mean, I think it's very difficult to replace someone like Martinez, obviously. But if you want somebody who's going to be a nuisance, to use their movement to create space for Lukaku, who is also capable of scoring themselves, then Villa is a good option there. An interesting one that occurred to me, which would never happen, but in a similar sort of mould as Neil Maupay at Brighton. I think obviously it's going to be a step up, but he's very good in terms of movement, in terms of creating space. He's got a bit of he is quite aggressive, but he's got a bit of nastiness to him, which I think Conte, if Conte stays, is always keen on. He's quick, and that sort of movement to create space for others is useful. I mean, I think the issue that Inter have as well is that in terms of the players that create for them, the top assist providers are Sanchez, Candreva, Biraghi, who I think they're extending the loan of from Fiorentina. But they're all old guys, or they're not necessarily bedded into the squad as well. So I think there's an argument that they need to start bringing in a bit more creativity that's younger. They have people like Stefano Sensi in the squad who I think can do that from a different position, Nicola Barella as well. But it's quite an old team in terms of its reliance on those players for goals and assists, and I think that's something that they need to be conscious of.
James, can I just ask, with this animus between Conte and the club, how much agency does he actually have over recruitment this summer?
He has a lot of agency because he was recruited by his former chief executive at Juventus, and that was done on the understanding that he would have considerable say, not in the kind of old school English manager style, but it has very much the project that Inter is. If you can't, it's not so much that if you can't beat them, join them, but they have more or less put in place the structure at the club that's kind of started this cycle of 9 years, 9 consecutive league titles at Juventus. Marotta was a key part in that, and in some respects, I think that's why Conte's been so emboldened in making some of the comments that he's made. Be it in the winter when he was saying, "Look, we just don't have the depth to compete. We've signed players from Cagliari, we've signed players from Sassuolo. We are Inter. We should be buying kind of established elite players." Even though those two players, Sensi and Barella, have been really good for them, and in fact, I would say that to your point, Alex. Sensi's injury has been a massive miss for Inter because he was probably the most exciting kind of playmaker that they've had since Wesley Sneijder. So I think this is ultimately with Conte. I think he feels that the team needs equipping in a certain way. He's got a kind of shield from the ownership in the form of Marotta. Just how patient the ownership is, because we're talking about Inter's owners, they're Chinese. Steven Zhang before lockdown was almost always in Milan, but since the pandemic hit, he's been back in China, and there is always the risk that certain comments get lost in translation. I think Conte's pushing it as far as he possibly can to get the signings he needs. But the thing is, Seb, is that you look at the bench that they've had in towards the end of the season. Christian Eriksen and Alexis Sanchez have been guys he's gone to from the bench. I mean, that's pretty impressive depth by most standards, whatever you think of those players and the stage that they're at in their careers.
Hey everyone, James Richardson here from the Totally Football Show. Listen, 11 months on, we're finally getting to the best bit of this football season because the Champions League and Europa League are about to restart at the sharp end. Last 8 knockout tournaments await in Portugal and Germany, and we'll be following both competitions with special nightly podcasts every single match day, ready for you to download first thing in the morning. So have your breakfast with Honigstein, Horncastle, Cox, Gurianov and all your other totally favourites, and me, as we wave goodbye to this epic footballing year in style. Our daily Totally Summer Special is available on Apple, Spotify and all the usual places, and of course you can also listen to it ad-free on the Athletic app.
Okay, I feel like it's going to feel like this every time we move on from a club that we could spend the entire podcast talking about Inter, but we must move on. Juventus is next. Shish Thomas starts us off, and we're going to take this step by step because there's quite a lot to get through with Juve. With Pirlo coming in, how will Juventus's transfer policy change? Now, James, I'm going to put that to you, but also with the caveat that we have no idea, presumably.
Well, the club has pretty clear needs, irrespective of who the manager is. So I think the positions are the same. Perhaps the skill set of the player in those positions is different.
Right.
But it's been apparent since the start of last season that they've needed another striker, someone who is capable of kind of running in behind, occupying centre backs, pinning them back, or being a threat in the air. Anything that can basically distract and create space for Cristiano, who, contrary to a lot of what a lot of people thought, he hasn't developed into a kind of penalty box striker or a poacher since leaving Real Madrid. He likes to play off the left, and I think Mario Mandzukic is. He was essentially frozen out and marginalised at the start of this season. He didn't accept a move away. He stuck around until they offloaded him in January. But I think Cristiano missed that profile of striker. So I think it's actually going to be very interesting to see what they do when they address this kind of need for a number 9. Do they go with someone like Arkadiusz Milik, the Napoli striker, who is tall and capable in the air, but he's someone who can also, kind of play quick combinations in the final third, bring others into play. That seemed to be very much the kind of striker that Maurizio Sarri would have liked to have had with him. And then, maybe someone who's a little bit more physical in the Mandzukic mold, like a Duvan Zapata or something like that. So. But there are loads of positions that Juventus need to look into. I mean, the fullbacks has been a real problem really since Stefan Lichtsteiner left. I mean, they've almost had like kind of 1 year rentals of like Dani Alves, which was a kind of experiment to try and make the team more attacking and quote unquote more European. And he walked away and was complaining that the club just were kind of half-hearted in going in that direction. They then had Cancelo, who's now at Man City, essentially because they could get a lot of money for him and they needed that last year for kind of their own balance sheet and financial fair play reasons. Danilo, who came the other way, has been disappointing in my opinion, even though he scored 14 seconds into his debut, replacing an injured Mattia De Sciglio. That has kind of been the story of that position all season, with Juan Cuadrado having to be reinvented as a right back. Cuadrado can play more or less anywhere on that flank. Right full back, right wing back, right midfield as a number 8, right wing, but it's a problem position for them.
And he's 32, right, Cuadrado?
Yeah, he's 32. He's done a good enough job, but he's not a natural fullback.
Well, I tell you what, let's pause here because this is the only sensible transfers question in the traditional form that I felt comfortable including, on the basis that, and we'll come back to talk about the midfield more, but that we don't know how Pirlo's going to want to play with his team, whereas this, as you mentioned at the beginning, is an obvious place that needs addressing. So I put this to Alex as well. This question came from @Big B asking for a right back. Can you please, Big B?
Yeah, so, I mean, I think the point that you make about Pirlo is really strong. I mean, obviously, Sarri was playing 4 at the back. Pirlo has often himself played as part, in a team that's using a back 3. So it's difficult to know necessarily which of those systems he's gone for, or he will go for. Milan seem keen for some reason to get rid of a right back, and David Calabria, I think, is a really, really strong prospect. Still a prospect, I guess. I think he's 23, and if Milan want to get rid of someone, then maybe a cheeky bid for him. Also within Serie, Paolo Giglione.
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 Yeah,
Thank
Genoa.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad there's someone here that can correct my pronunciation.
That was
rather
like the
than
scene
just-
from Inglourious Bastards when they try and go to the cinema, isn't it? And it's like, you're the third best Italian speaker here.
I'm going to make a jingle for your mispronunciations, Alex, and we're going to start playing it every time it happens.
Consistent and terrible. The reason I like him is that, I mean, he's got 5 assists this season. He's physically robust, but he can either play as an orthodox right back or as a right wing back, or potentially even as a right midfielder. So it gives that kind of flexibility for a young coach who's coming in, doesn't necessarily know what his best system is and how the process of transitioning from a very, very kind of fixed system style that was quite differentiated from how Juventus were put together as a squad. That flexibility would probably be useful. I just want to chuck one name actually at James for the striker role. Manolo Gabbiadini is still kind of bouncing around at Sampdoria, doesn't necessarily seem to have much of a home. I really liked him when he was a Southampton player, although that didn't work out. Is he the sort of person who might have that flexibility?
Gabbiadini's time for a kind of step up of this kind of level, I think, has passed. I think he's at the right place where for him now, which is Samp, which is a club he left for Napoli, which was, I suppose, his big opportunity, and it didn't quite work out for him there. I also think Juventus, they would like to get younger in that position because they had Moise Kean, and ultimately they ended up selling Kean, I think, for financial reasons, in that he was a homegrown player and he was all profit when they couldn't sell Dybala to Spurs or Manchester United, because essentially Dybala said, I'm not going anywhere, they sold Kean instead. And I think, that's a shame, because he had a great spring last year in the first team. I also think the player in that position has to be credible to Cristiano. I think as much as Pirlo will have a say in recruitment, and this week in which we're recording, they've had a series of meetings on strategy. I think what Cristiano feels he needs in that position is also going to be pretty key.
Was he in the meetings?
No, Cristiano's on holiday.
Okay.
But I'm sure he's had a way to make his feelings known.
James, can I introduce a really obvious name here? It just seems a bit strange to me that, given Juve's need. Did they hold the interest in Achraf Hakimi? Because he seems such a logical evolution from Cuadrado.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good fit, Seb. To be honest, so far they've principally focused on a left back rather than on a right wing back. And Inter did so well in kind of catching everyone whilst they were sleeping with that, because from what I can gather, that deal was pretty much done in March, even though it kind of only broke in June time. So they stole a march on football cliche there, on the competition there. So I'm actually still quite curious to see what Juventus do in that right wing back position, because it's quite a tricky one actually to find a good player in.
Okay, Eric asks for a midfielder, which was pretty broad, but I've deliberately included it so that we can cover a couple of different areas here, because Blaise Matuidi has, of course, left for Inter Miami, which is David Beckham's American project. Pjanic has been swapped for Artemelo from Barcelona, although that does appear, I'm not entirely sure, it does appear to be for reasons other than him necessarily being specifically requested. There were also rumours about Bentancur leaving, although no idea how substantiated they are, and people are always talking about Rabiot leaving as well. So whatever happens, there could be a lot of change in this area. It seems like an area of upheaval. But given that we're unclear about how Pirlo wants to play, James, what would you expect to happen in the midfield zone?
Well, under Serie, this was a big problem because it was clear that the personnel was ill-adapted to how he wanted to play football.
And old.
Yeah, quite. But then again, you look at someone like Miralem Pjanic, for example. Pjanic seemed to have everything that Sarri wanted. In his first press conference, he said he wanted Pjanic to have 150 touches a game. That if Pjanic didn't succeed, it would be Sarri's failure. And ultimately, he's moved to Barcelona in a move that does get Juventus younger in that position and does bring in someone who is, by all accounts, technically gifted. I must admit, I haven't seen a lot of Artur, but ultimately this was about two teams getting sizable profits on their balance sheet by June 30th. As for the rest of the midfield, I mean, you mentioned Rabiot is always linked with a move away. Rabiot had a fairly strong end to the season, but I think, as with so many players at Juventus, particularly the ones that have arrived on a free transfer, there's always a temptation to cash in on those players because it's all profit. So that's true of him. It's true of Aaron Ramsey, even though Ramsey wants to stay, wants another crack at Serie after his first year there. Khedira, they'll have problems getting a fee for because his age and his wage is huge, sort of €6 million net a year. So this is going to be maybe a theme of Juventus' summer as they look to bring their wage bill down. Is that they've already let Matuidi go essentially for nothing, just to get his wages off their payroll. And they might do that with another player. I mean, I think Khedira is the first one that comes to mind. And then there's obviously Gonzalo Higuain. Higuain, who is in the final year of his contract, which is huge and a big burden on the club. So I think that's going to be a hallmark of Juventus' business over this summer. But they need to skill up that midfield. And I think the only one who's truly convinced, and I don't think is on the market, is Rodrigo Bentancur, who's been... who looks like a phenomenal player in the making, someone who can play as a number 8, probably their best pressing midfield player as well, and may evolve into someone who can play in front of the defence and set the tempo of the team's passing as well. So, he's the only one I look at and think of as being absolutely safe.
Yeah, okay. Lovely player. Okay, that's Juve done. When we come back, we will do Fiorentina. Okay, Fiorentina. Pushkar Kulkarni, only one question for Fiorentina. Would like a replacement for Chiesa, since, according to Pushkar, he looks set for a move to Juventus. Do tell me more, Dr. J.
Dr. J, love it.
Is that fine? Happy with that?
Yeah.
Very familiar, isn't it?
Julius Erving, brilliant. Look, with Chiesa, he, I think, has had a disappointing season. He ended the campaign well, came back kind of firing after the restart when Beppe Acchini, the Fiorentina manager, decided to use him in a different role in the 3-5-2, basically move him back to playing as a right wing back, but like in a kind of asymmetric kind of way, with the defense kind of shuffling across from left to right to allow Chiesa to push up. But as some kind of high-level coaches have said to me, do you really think paying 70 million for a guy who has only got into double figures in terms of goals in Serie A because he scored a hat-trick against Bologna 2 weeks before the end of the season? Apart from that, it was going to be another kind of 6 assists, 7 goals kind of year. I think it's going to be actually quite difficult for Fiorentina to get someone to pay their asking price in this market. So that's going to be interesting to follow. I mean, we're talking about right wing backs at Juventus, at Inter. I mean, obviously Hakimi's going to San Siro. Maybe you look at him if Pirlo ends up playing a 3-5-2 or even a 4-3-3, then maybe Chiesa works there. But the price that he would command, I think, makes it very difficult in this environment. And then to replace him, were he to leave, they've already got Riccardo Sotil, who's 21, a winger within the existing setup. He's shown promise this year. For the right wing back, they already have Paul Lirola. I think they would go for a striker at Fiorentina because that's been a bit of an issue for them this season, getting kind of consistent numbers of goals from a kind of centre forward. So, they've been linked with bringing Mario Mandzukic back from, I think he's been in Dubai for the last 4 months. Not on holiday, playing, but playing for that club where Juventus tend to send players like Mehdi Benatia and their North Korean striker Han as well. So I think were they to move him on, they would look for a striker.
Alex, I'll come to you now because this is a question I put to you before the podcast. Would you have a replacement for Chiesa in the maybe unlikely scenario that he does leave?
I mean, I agree with everything that James has said in terms of, I mean, my notes about this are that, what are you asking for a replacement for? Is it in the wing-back role, in which case I think Lirola looks really, really good. I agree with James that actually what you're really asking for there is kind of a striker, but actually Chiesa, when Chiesa was playing as a striker, he was sort of more either floating off a proper centre forward or even playing alongside Ribery as two kind of very, very floaty, not really forwards. I think somebody who has the versatility of being able to play off the wing as well as through the centre would be sensible. I've gone for Keita Balde, who had an outstanding season for Lazio back in 2016-17 and scored 16 goals. He's quick and strong and can play through the middle, but he gives that flexibility. I mean, Fiorentina have been quite a kind of tactically inconsistent team, so it's not necessarily clear, again, exactly what it is that they're asking for, but someone like Balde, who's experienced in Serie A, who can play in a variety of different positions and fulfill different functions within different systems, might be a reasonable shout.
Okay, exciting stuff. Let's move on to Lazio. Pacific Dream, question from YouTube. Pacific Dream asks for a backup for Lucas Leiva because the team have struggled without him. James, what do you think?
Yeah, Lucas, I mean, he was the player of the year last year in 2018-19 when they won the Cup. And yeah, he's been kind of invaluable as just someone who breaks play up and gives it to their best guys to go and do their best work. And when he got hurt, I mean, he had surgery when the team went into lockdown and wasn't ready when they came back. And as you say, they really missed him. I think they could do with someone in the kind of Martin de Roon kind of mold to take his place. I don't think that's feasible, really, given that he's at Atalanta and doing very well there. But David Silva obviously is not going to be signed to basically be a destroyer in front of the defence for Lazio as well. So yeah,
I'd love to see it though.
I'm curious to see what they do there. Maybe they just back Cataldi, who since coming back from loans with Genoa and Benevento did actually pretty well off the bench last year.
Okay, Alex, I put it to you also, a backup for Lucas Leiva, por favor?
I think Cataldi deserves a crack. It's lovely to hear praise for Martin de Roon, who I don't think anybody envisaged when he left Middlesbrough that he would go on to be part of the most tactically exciting side in Europe, but there we go. Yeah. I think that someone who can shield the back four but also is a little bit more dynamic is a good idea. Not that I would want a player that I really like to go to Lazio, but free Lucas Torreira from Arsenal. He was exceptional at Samp, sitting at the base of a midfield diamond. He's got good positional awareness. He's not really been used, I think, properly at Arsenal. He's got a bit more dynamism. He's able to play slightly more exciting passes when he wants to, but he will be disciplined and positionally astute and mop up stuff in front of a back four. And it's just not worked out at Arsenal for whatever reason. I think they're redesigning that midfield there. And it would be a real shame to see someone like Torreira, if he's not used at Arsenal, just sort of fall off to the wayside. So maybe coming back to Italy would be a sensible move for him. One player as well that I really, really like is Manuel Aguate, who's over in Uruguay. He's a 19-year-old defensive midfielder, and Uruguay appears to be producing really, really good midfielders at the moment. And he very much is that sort of, screen, mop up, do the simple things really, really well. He deserves a move to Europe as soon as possible, I think, and he would be very good in that role.
Okay, I'll stick with you, Alex, because Kelly Beck on Twitter asks for a replacement for Senad Lulic on the basis of his age.
Yeah, I
may have paraphrased that.
It's tricky. How have you paraphrased it? What does it say? Like, I don't want to know. Mihailo Rastic at Montpellier. I think the thing with Lulic is that he's been extremely useful for Lazio as a versatile option. So he's played as a left back, a left wing back, a left midfielder. I think he's potentially even played as a central midfielder on rare occasions. And Rastic is a similar kind of versatile player, generally left-sided, is also fairly able to get forwards and contribute from an attacking perspective, but will just sort of slot in and do the simple things very, very well, and ensure that flank is kind of tied up.
The same question to you, please, James, which was a replacement for Senad Lulic.
It's hard because Lulic is the captain. He's probably their longest-serving player of certainly this kind of cycle. And they certainly missed him when he was injured since the restart. I mean, again, Lazio just had a catastrophic final week going into the restart in terms of injuries. In terms of replacements, I think they would probably look to reunite the tandem that was so successful at Spal, which is Manuel Aguate, who is on the right-hand side that they signed last summer, and bring in Mohamed Fades, who was on the left. Fades was excellent in the the season before last. His injury and Lazare's departure were kind of critical, really, in Spal going down. And the other name that's been mentioned is that of Marcos Acuna, the Argentine, who's 28, plays for Sporting in Portugal, who's a number 9 who can play at left centre back, which is brilliant. But I think what they'll do is I think what they like about him is the fact that he can cover not only for Lulic and maybe succeed Lulic, but also for Stefan Radu on the left-hand side of their back three, because Radu is really good, really important for them, like Lulic, one of their leaders, and yet when he's been injured, they haven't had a left footer often in that position, which is again why they've been linked with one of the revelations of this season in Serie A, which is Hellas Verona's 20-year-old centre-back Marish Kumbula.
James, are they expecting a battle to keep Luis Alberto at the club this summer?
Well, it's curious, Seb, because he has performed so well in, I'd say, 2 of the last three seasons that it's slightly bemusing that he hasn't got a quote-unquote bigger move. He was linked with Sevilla last summer, and that was where his kind of head was at. He was thinking that he might go there, but it's very difficult to get players out of Lazio. I don't want to make the Daniel Levy Spurs comparison, but Claudio Lotito is known as Lotirchio, which means he's a bit tight, in that he's not going to just let you walk away for nothing. He wants absolute to maximise the value out of the players that he's got, and they've sold really well, in recent years under him. I mean, you mentioned Luis Alberto, but the same applies to Milinkovic-Savic, in that in some respects Savic has just been completely priced out of the market by Lotito as someone who is supposedly a Serbian Pogba who is worth more than 100 million. I think that's very difficult to foresee anyone paying that. But I don't know whether it's just Luis Alberto not being on many people's radar, even though he's had 16 assists this season. He's broken into the Spanish team, but hasn't established himself as in the Spanish team. Maybe that's another factor. He wasn't really a part of many of the Spain youth teams that were winning everything in Europe as well, which were obviously very well scouted. But yeah, at this stage of his career, it is slightly strange that no one has come in big for him. But at the same time, I think the big thing for Lazio going into this summer is that they've got Champions League football to look forward to, which they haven't had that for more than a decade. So I think that will be key in helping them keep some of their best players.
Okay. When we come back, we will be chatting more with Mr. James Horncastle.
Hi there, I'm David Ornstein, and I've launched a brand new show on YouTube, Ask Ornstein, where I answer questions from our athletic subscribers. To get your question answered, simply leave a comment at the bottom of my column every Monday and I'll choose my favourites. To watch the show, head over to the Tifo Podcast YouTube channel, and a new episode will be up every Tuesday afternoon.
Okay, we're back. And now we have two more teams to go before I think we're going to finish today. I'm going to start with Atalanta, the Paradiselenk. From YouTube, says, what can Atalanta do to further cement their European place? I think Seb wanted to add to this as well by saying, what happens if a couple of guys leave? Was there more to that question, or did I just take it right out of your mouth, Seb?
No, that's pretty much it, because this is what usually happens. You have a season like this, the vultures descend, and then clubs pick off parts of sides that they don't necessarily know how to use properly but are willing to pay for. I was just wondering if that was going to happen to Atalanta.
Yeah, okay, James, how do you think?
Well, we've written about this a little bit on The Athletic in that, Atalanta have been able to sustain being in Europe and regularly getting into Europe for pretty much 4 years now. They've finished in the top 4 3 of the last 4 years. I would say that the first breakup has already happened. That was when they sold Roberto Gagliardini for upwards of €25 million to Inter. Frank Kessie and Andrea Conti to AC Milan, and then they would sell maybe 1 or 2 every year. But I think the big difference over the last two seasons is they've kept the core together. And Atalanta have such a good academy with so many players who do so well either at youth level or on loan at other Serie A clubs of kind of similar size. For example, they've sent 2 players on loan to Parma in the last 2 years. Last year it was Alessandro Bastoni, the left-sided centre-back. This year it's Dejan Kulusevski. And they've been able to sell both of those players for more than €30 million. And they've raised 100 million from offloading peripheral but very talented young players to other teams in Serie A. And I think when you qualify for the Champions League in back-to-back years, and you've got that as well, it means you're more resistant to those vultures that are descending, as Seb describes. Ultimately, the human nature does come into it, in that some players will have offers. Gosens, maybe Zapata, Timothy Castagna, for example, who's been their alternative as a wing-back, can play either side. He's in the final year of his contract, and I expect he'll leave as well. But they're a difficult team to get players out of, and part of that is the wealth they've managed to accumulate by just overachieving. But the other is that there's a kind of real sense of belonging there. That players like living where they live. They like their teammates. They all get on. They like the manager. There's a real kind of family atmosphere, which I think is really hard to achieve in modern football, particularly when you're a club of that level, where clubs in Serie A are so dependent on the churn of player trading, and they seem to have become less and less addicted to that because of their success. So I think in that sense it's actually really encouraging. And also they've, in the last couple of years, when they offloaded, when the last kind of, let's say, Gasperini's first team was dismantled, that was built on young players that he kind of gave opportunities to from the academy. And what they've done in the meantime is, sort of mainly bring in kind of cheap but really kind of exciting foreign players, and that's allowed the academy to breathe a little bit. And I'm told that the latest crop of players, some of whom have already made their debuts, is really exciting. So I think that just goes to show why Alex called them the most kind of exciting, tactically innovative team in Europe at the moment. I think this is they're a model club as a whole, rather than just one single aspect making them special.
James, this isn't a tactical or transfer question, but I was on social media after PSG Atalanta, and is there previous between Gasperini and Astrology's Ramon Domenech that I've missed?
No, there's previous between Domenech and Italy, which goes back to an under-21 European Championship final back in the late 90s, when I think it was an Italy side with Totti, and everyone beat his French team. And then obviously in 2006, the World Cup final. That was one of the most misguided tweets
That's one of the strangest things I've
long
seen.
time.
Yeah.
The strangest thing since, as you say, he was picking teams based on their zodiac sign and proposing to his partner in a press conference. So yeah, not a great look for Dominic.
So are we saying that the nation of Italy is responsible for Raymond Domenech just generally? He was created by this European Championship.
Well, if that's the case, I don't think it's something that Italy would be proud of.
No.
For someone whose players went on strike at a World Cup and basically sent him out to talk to the media with a kind of a demands list. Not great from Dominic.
With regards to the Atalanta Academy, obviously those two players you mentioned, Bastoni and Kulusevski, kind of basically went straight off somewhere else, having had those loans. And this season, although Castagnier is relatively young, they haven't actually used that many young players or given anyone any particularly significant minutes. So are those players going to get the opportunity? Is a clear out almost a good thing because then some of those players can come through? Or is it very much we'll send them out on loan with to buy deals, we'll try and keep this current lot together, and the academy is more of a kind of revenue raiser rather than a pathway to the first team?
I mean, they have given minutes to Hamid Traore's brother, for example, who's the one they're most excited about. Jacopo Dariva came on, 19-year-old, with 15, 20 minutes to spare in that Champions League game. Ibrahima Colley's another one. But I take your point. And why I take your point is because, some agents of younger players in Atalanta's academy say that, this once upon a time was a great club for getting first team minutes as a young player. But they've become so good. That first team is so good, it's very difficult for young players to break into it. So, often they go down to the second division, they get their minutes there. That's something that happened to Mattia Caldara, for example, who's just come back from AC Milan, non-successful spell there. It was true of Kessié. He spent some time in the second division. Gagliardini, and then they come back. But such is the standard at Atalanta now. This is the surprising thing, that is, even for a youth team that was stunning in the Youth League. Is it still called the Youth League? Yes, it is. In the Champions League, and was knocked out kind of quite tellingly by Lyon in the knockout stages in terms of great European academies. They've just won the Under-19 league title in Italy as well, I think for the second year in a row. So ultimately, it'd be great to see those players really establish themselves in the first team. But if they don't, Atalanta know they can probably make 30 million out of guys who've only played 30 minutes for them, which is amazing.
Okay, let's move on to Milan now before we finish things off. And James Horncastle, I'm going to read back to you a quote that you once read to me.
God.
You said, they have a very complementary tandem at the moment of Frankie Kessie and Ismail Benacer, but with Lucas Biglia's contract up, they need someone to come in and alternate with those two, and I think they're looking for someone with a versatile profile, someone who can play make, but also get up and down the pitch, play as a number 6, essentially, and just dovetail nicely with either one of those players. So you said that to me. I'm now saying it back to you and asking you, who is that person? Do you have any thoughts?
Well, I think they want someone more of Kessier's profile than Benacer's. I mean, ultimately, sort of a blend between the two would be great if that's possible to find. But I mean, they had Timu Bakayoko last season on loan from Chelsea, and Bakayoko did okay, and can basically be that kind of blend when he's at his best. I would like to see them sign someone in the Tonali mold, but I think that's going to be very difficult for them just because it's very likely that he'll end up at Inter instead. But I think Tonali has that ability. He's got that kind of tenaciousness. Likes to jump into tackles. Likes to spray the ball around. Looks like Pirlo, but has a kind of more Dimitri Albertini, Daniele De Rossi style to him. I would like to see that, even though it's it's probably unlikely.
Alex, we've recently released a Tifo video all about AC Milan, which is why we've left into the end of the podcast. There's a whole lot of content out there for listeners to go and view if they so choose. But I don't know if you want to without spoiling too much of it, drop a name or two that you had a suggestion for this midfield area.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think actually Lucas Torreira is not a bad idea for that. I mean, in the video we've talked about somebody else from Arsenal, but Torreira I think would fit in and offer that versatility. I completely agree that Tonali would be a lovely player there. He offers something slightly different, but it's not. I mean, there's this perception with Tonali because of where he's come from and because he's got long hair that he's Pirlo. But I would urge people to read James's piece on The Athletic that clears a lot of that stuff up. And
theathletic.com/Tifo transfers.
That would be the one. Yes,
40% off.
Absolutely, that.
Yummy stuff. Please continue.
And also possibly, I mean, again, depending on how much money they have, and how much they want to bring in somebody who's a genuine sort of threat to Kessie in terms of taking his first team place, someone like Dennis Zakaria at Borussia Mönchengladbach, who has the dynamism, the ability to get up and down the pitch, who can cover defensively well, but will also pop up and score the occasional goal. I think that's probably the kind of guy that they're looking for. But, with a lot of these teams, it's as much about how the team themselves see themselves playing. I think that's why, for example, the Juve thing was so difficult. It's what makes looking at a team like Atalanta in some ways more straightforward, because although they are tactically complex, they have a very clear identity. And I think teams that are maybe a bit more in transition, a bit more still trying to figure out how they're going to balance things, particularly in midfield, it does make it very, very difficult. And I think if you sign someone like Tonali, for example, then that automatically alters the way that you do stuff. You start to then try and create a team around a player of that quality currently, but also more importantly, the future quality that you've got there. And I think that makes it a different set of answers.
Zanti Bowser asks for a new striker. No more info than that, but that's what you have to go on, James.
A striker? Well, what, for AC Milan?
Yes.
Okay.
Eric Cantona.
Well, I mean, yeah, is Zlatan a Cantona figure?
Indeed. I didn't even think about that. That's very true. Good point. Turns out I was on point, and I didn't even mean to be.
Look, I mean, they're still in negotiations as we record this with Zlatan about extending his current spell with the team. I think Stefano Pioli keeping the job, I think has helped his candidacy in that respect, strengthened his hand, because Pioli's a big fan of Zlatan's and kind of appreciates what he's done to kind of help the young players grow at the club, because it is a very young team. I think it is the youngest side with Fiorentina in Serie A. And they also think Rebic has shown that he can play centre forward if needed this season. And there's still more to come from Leao. So I think a number 9 is still something that's on their radar, but when they've got essentially 3 players who can play in that position now, rather than just the one or two, rather than just one naturally, I suppose, it's less of a need than it was. So I'm going to dodge that one.
Okay, fair enough. Alex, no dodging.
No dodging. I think you've got 2 aspects to consider here, one of which I am going to dodge because I have a sensible reason for it. Well, no, I think what Ibrahimovic does isn't just add a strong striking presence of a particular kind, but he's the sort of player who even now does have a kind of transformational ability on a squad. His work ethic is extraordinary. His leadership is very high. He is an inspirational character to younger players. And I don't know that is replaceable, actually. I think it's really, really hard to find someone like that. If you want a sort of Zlatan light, though, Not that would anyone want a Zlatan light? I don't know.
I think the whole point is that he's not light, but yes, I take your point.
Sure. So Strasbourg, who are a team who I have lots of mini crushes on, players at Strasbourg, they have a guy called Ludovic Ajorc, who is the closest thing I've found to a Zlatan-style striker of anyone. He's 6'6". But
which martial art did he study?
I don't know, but he's got that kind of deftness of touch, the creativity, the ability to do something slightly out of the ordinary or bizarre. He's not a kind of quintessential target man despite his size, and I think he's a really interesting striker. Strasbourg are the kind of team that quietly produce really, really good players and don't actually get necessarily noticed all that much. So I'm going to continue to bang that drum.
Okay, well, you bang away, and we'll end over here. Thanks very much for everyone's time. Thanks for everyone to listening. Of course, a quick reminder that you can get 40% off a subscription to The Athletic by visiting theathletic.com/Tifo transfers to read all of James's work. Thanks, James, for coming.
A pleasure.
Good, that's nice to hear. And thank you to Seb.
Thank you very much, Joe.
And to Alex.
Thank you, Joe.
I'm back next week with 3 more episodes. I don't even know when this is going out, actually, or what week. But there's non-stop. It's all happening. Everything's happening. Goodbye.